weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to a very live, very special edition. Well, I don't know if it's that special, really, of Socialism Live. We are rounding out Red May. Red May, of course, is an organization out in Seattle, an overtly admitted socialist organization that does events all about socialism throughout the entire month of May. And we have been very, very blessed to watch many of their events. And, you know, it's starting to wind down, and just in time, too, because I got to tell you guys, I almost didn't even do this stream today. My brain is still so fried from last night. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can. I don't know. But then I was like, Carlin, it is May 28th. There are only a couple more days in Red May. I think they've only actually got one more presentation that they have scheduled on the docket for right now to live. No, they've got two more, but this is a reschedule. But this late fascism one is on Tuesday, and I want to watch that one. That's at 2 p.m. But really, Red May is winding down, and I was like, you know what? We've come this far. Just because I watched literally 7 hours of socialism yesterday, just because I woke up with a headache this morning, because of how crazy some of the stuff we heard last night was, that doesn't mean we give up, because quitters never win and winners never quit, or something like that. I don't even know. So guys, we are going to continue and get the last two presentations that I want to watch in for Red May. And again, per usual, this is a live stream. This is going to start in about 9.5 minutes. And this one, I'm pretty sure, is going to be a boring economics presentation. I don't know, and I'm just going to be very, very honest. I don't know how much spice we're going to get in this one, because it sounds to me like it's going to be a boring economics presentation. But you know what we say about this, though, is that one of the things the socialists do to get us to not listen to them is they make it so boring that no one in their right minds would sit here and listen to them, because it gets really boring sometimes. But these are the moments that we train for. These are the moments where we find out what we're made of. And if we can sit through a boring economics presentation by a socialist, we can do almost anything. So guys, today they're going to be watching, we're going to be watching rather, a presentation called Money and Capital in the 21st Century. And there isn't really a description of what the presentation is about, because why would there be a description, socialists? But we do know that the people presenting are Paul. Paul is the editor of the International Journal of the Political Economy and the author of Social Knowledge, an essay on the nature and limits of social science, art in its time. Also, he wrote something called The Economic Crisis and the Failure of Capitalism and Theory as Critique, essays on capitalism. And he looks like he's like some sort of like reporter or quasi academic. I'm not really sure what his deal is. We're going to hear from Jamie. Jamie lives in Chicago. Chicago is one of the most socialist cities in the United States. Chicago is the home of Haymarket Books, a socialist book publisher. Chicago is also the home of the Socialism Conference that started Socialism Saturday off. And so lots of socialists in and around Chicago. And Jamie is doing their PhD in communication at Northwestern. Excellent, excellent. And then we have Tony, who is a professor emeritus of philosophy from Iowa State University. So as always, we've got our academics in tow, because colleges have basically been taken over with Marxists. I hope we all understand that now. And we're going to listen to them today talk about money and capital in the 21st century. I have no idea what they're going to talk about. It's probably going to be boring economics, but we're going to give it a go anyway. So the presentation is going to get started in about 7 minutes. I have pinned the link to their stream at the top of the chat. Of course, Red May doesn't really seem to like it when we stream their presentations, but I personally think that Red May owes me a great big thank you, because I heard through the grapevine that when Red May was streaming a presentation on Bolivia earlier, which I did not want to watch, they had like 4 people watching. I somehow managed to increase Red May's audience like tenfold at least. So I really think that Red May should thank me, but they tend not to like that we're streaming. They tend not to like that we're watching. They think ideas are private property. They tried to report me to YouTube to give me a copyright strike, and that didn't work, just like I told you it wasn't going to work. And here we are anyway. And, I really think we should be better partners in this, but Red May wants to be combative. That's their choice, but they're still streaming their stuff live on YouTube, and ain't nothing they can do about it. So it's going to get started in about 6 minutes. If you do choose to go over to their chat to ask questions, please don't shitpost. Please don't be disruptive. I want to be better than the socialist, okay? I want all of us to be better than the socialists. I don't want to give them any opportunity to lie about us and say we're raiding their chat or this or that or the other thing. But I do think it is fair game to ask questions of them, to really try to nail down what it is they think and make them say the quiet part out loud. And so if you have questions that are related to the presentation, I absolutely encourage you to ask them, but be polite, be cordial. It doesn't matter if they're rude to us. We don't need to be rude back to them. I feel like I had a good exchange yesterday with Sean, who is the most handsome of all socialists with Red May. At least I think so. I don't know. Kyle's all right too, but I think Sean is more handsome than Kyle. That's for sure. And so just be nice, guys. Just be nice. This is a quiet Sunday. It's a chill Sunday. We had a big night last night. Just be chill. But as we're waiting for the 5 minutes to get that started, I just want to remind everyone that I have 2 hours for this stream today. If this stream goes longer than 2 hours, I'm going to have to cut it short, because it is movie night. Sunday is movie night in my supporter Discord. Tonight, in but a couple of hours, we are watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. So if you are a supporter on my YouTube channel, on my Substack, on my locals, or on my Patreon, I have posted all the links for you to be able to join our Discord for tonight and join us for movie night. We are honoring the life and times of Tina Turner by watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, the classic. And so if you want to join us for movie night at 8 p.m. and you're not yet in my supporter Discord, this is a good time to do it, guys. Just while we're streaming socialism, just go join the supporter Discord, get verified, let us know what platform you came from, because we do double check just to make sure that everyone is actually a supporter. And then at 8 p.m., after we eat our vegetables and watch this boring socialist economics presentation, we're going to go have our dessert by watching Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in the supporter Discord, and we're going to chill out and we're going to do trivia and we're going to be normal human beings doing something normal for once that's not socialist. Okay, you know, it is a dystopian society, so maybe there will be some parallels. I guess we'll have to see. But that is happening at 8 p.m. tonight. You've got plenty of time between now and then to get verified. And one of the ways that you can get access to the supporter Discord is by becoming a supporter on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. Of course, over 10 of you became supporters last night because I said I would read the book Transgender Marxism if you guys, if 10 of you became supporters last night on the Substack. And apparently, me torturing myself is like the best incentive to get you guys to support my work, which I think is a little interesting. Like I'm basically like killing myself to like bring you like the news that no one else is bringing you on the internet about what's going on in the anti-woke space, what's going on in the schools, stuff like that. And you know what the thing is that gets you guys to sign up for my Substack? Saying I will read Transgender Marxism and drive myself to a new level of insanity. All right, you know, I'm gonna do it. I stick by a promise. But if you want to sign up as a supporter and get access to our movie night later, and also a variety of perks that we do throughout the week, to include 2 Zoom calls every single week on Mondays and Wednesdays. So we're doing our next one tomorrow at 7 p.m. To include Bitchcraft, which we do on the second Saturday of every month, to include movie nights on Sundays. You want to become a supporter and then check out the weekly email. I just sent this out a little while ago called the Unwoke Roundup. And how you get your supporter perks is you scroll all the way down past all of the stories I've covered this week, and you go to the bottom of the newsletter, and underneath this red box right here, if I were signed in, you would be able to see the Zoom links for the Zoom calls that we have each week. You would also be able to see the link to join the supporter Discord. So when you're a supporter on Substack, that is the place you go for your perks. If you are in my locals community, I just posted a post earlier. If you are a Patreon supporter, I just posted a post earlier. And if you are a member on this here YouTube channel, I posted for members too the link to the supporter Discord, so you can come join us in a couple hours. And guys, last night, just so you know, on the Substack, I posted this story. This is one of the untold stories of GLSEN and the whole Target thing. So people are pissed off that Target is funding this organization called GLSEN. We've talked about GLSEN many times on this channel, so this should have been not a surprise to anyone here. But one of the things they're not talking about is that GLSEN funds the GSAs, the gender sexuality alliances in schools. And so Target, by funding GLSEN, is actually funding the training of your kids to be future queer activists. I posted a whole bunch of video clips proving this last night based on trainings that GLSEN has done with high school students on the internet. You guys know how much I love it when organizations put high school kids on the internet, or middle school kids, as the case may be. You can find that over on the Substack now, and that is available to see. We will be talking about that, as well as the Groomer Middle School and Tufts University studying non-binary 3-year-olds, all on tomorrow's 5 p.m. stream, which we're going back to our regular time, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. We'll talk about a whole bunch of good stuff tomorrow. Let's see, what else do I have? Oh, Socialism Bingo, duh. Here's your bingo card. If you want to play Socialism Bingo, go ahead and click generate cards. You get a free square in the middle, and then if you're really lucky, you get solidarity twice. There it is. Philip, coming, Philip. I'm coming. Sorry, guys.
We'll have
You guys know how to play bingo.
Events.
Hi, Philip.
Let me clue you into some that are happening over the next 3 days.
Philip, jumped the gun
Tuesday,
there.
On Tuesday, May 30th,
Holy
11
shit.
a.m., we have a panel called Late Fascism with Alberto Toscano, Nikhil Singh, and Robin Marasco. Alberto has a new book coming out from Verso on late fascism. I've seen it. It's wonderful. On Wednesday, May 31st at 11 a.m., the legal crisis in Chile, oy vey, is all I can say with what's happening with the constitutional process now. That has Gerardo Munoz, Rodrigo Carmi, and Alejandro Castillo. Again, 11 a.m. on Wednesday. But today, I am really happy to introduce Money and Capital in the 21st Century with Paul Maddock, Jamie Merchant, and Tony Smith. Tony will be our guide through this labyrinth of capital that we're trying to navigate in the 21st century. Tony teaches at the University of Iowa State Ames, Iowa. He's the author of Beyond Liberal
he teaches
Egalitarianism,
currently at Iowa
Globalization,
State.
and also a wonderful article on Marx as a
Autumn, please stay focused on the
Lakotoshian
presentation. I don't give a flying fuck about Turning Point.
Tony, welcome to Red May. Nice to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be
Iowa
here,
State
and I'm very
professor.
grateful to Red May for organizing this discussion. Today we're going to talk about money and its place in contemporary capitalism with two authors who have recently written very, very important books on this topic. Paul Maddock, his book is called The Return of Inflation, Money and Capital in the 21st Century. It's going to be published by Reaction Books.
The Return of Inflation due to
and Jamie
the
Merchant,
pandemic
his
that
book
you
is
guys
called
championed.
Endgame. It's going to come out in London sometime next year. Now, we want to spend most of today talking about contemporary capitalism, but it seems to make sense to begin on a more general level, more basic level maybe, and just talk about money a little bit. There's hardly anything that's more familiar to us. It's one of the most everyday things in our lives. We can't go a day without dealing with it.
Thank you for letting me know, Kurt.
And yet, when we ask what it is, it turns out to be a pretty mysterious thing. So we want to think about what it is, what makes money in capitalism different from any other type of society. Capitalism is not the first type of society to use money, but there's something different about money in capitalism from any other period in human history. There's a familiar story that money is just there for our convenience. It's just another tool that we can use that helps us get the things we need more efficiently.
What would you prefer to use?
This is really one of the big questions that Paul takes on in his book.
Iowa State University
we can
professor.
Begin with Paul just talking about
what would you prefer
how he
that's
deals
not money
with this in his book.
Sure, and I'll try to be very short. Although, as Tony just said, the thing about money is that it is both completely ordinary and everyday, and deeply mysterious and complicated in the way in which it is ramified throughout the workings of modern society. But the other thing Tony said, which is absolutely crucial, is that although money is a very, very old institution, it is different in capitalism in its functioning than in any other mode of society. It plays a different role, and it is central to the functioning of our society in a way that it hasn't been central to the functioning of other societies. Namely, almost a very large proportion of social activity, the activities of production and consumption, are mediated through the handling of money. So, for example, even if you look at something like housework, in which much the work is not actually paid for, it is performed using materials that are bought in stores. It's performed in buildings that are paid for which rent is paid. So even if you look at the non-monetary aspects of life, money is always lurking there in the background. It is central to the way in which it functions. Why is that? It's actually for a reason which is obvious once you step back and look at a capitalist society. Because a fundamental feature of capitalism is that most productive activity is carried out by people who are paid money in order to work for other people. And money therefore plays an extremely important function. In order to acquire goods, you have to have money in a mercantile system, such a market system.
In order to buy stuff, you have to have
money. But in order
to
get money, you either have to inherit it, or somehow mysteriously have it, or you have to work for somebody else who then pays you that money. So money is actually, while it appears to be a technology for mediating the exchange of goods between people, it's actually a technology for keeping people from having access to the goods that they produce. If I work in a bakery,
because you have to
I can't just eat bread. I have to earn money from the owner of the bakery, and then I have to buy back some of my own product.
It's
so
not,
the function,
you didn't pay for it, bro.
And central
the owner of the bakery paid for it. Holy shit,
is to prevent the people who produce goods from having
just
access
because you
to those
bake
goods
the bread doesn't
unless
mean you
they
bought
agree
the
to
supplies
work
to make the bread.
For an employer another day or another month or another year. So money actually has the function of reproducing the class difference between people who own means of production and employ other people to work for them, and the people who have to work for them. And that is really the key to understanding both what capital is and what money is in a capitalist society. That money is the thing which, so to speak, it's the social mechanism that forces people to go to work every day, thereby reproducing the difference between those who own property in society and those almost everybody else who have to work for them.
Oh, there it goes.
I don't know if you want to.
I thought they blocked me from their chat for a second.
There's plenty to add. Jamie?
I mean, yeah, in one sense there is plenty to add, and in another sense there isn't that much more from what Paul said, in my opinion. Like when we drill down to get to like the essential like characteristics of
I asked in the chat, why don't you just buy this stuff to make the bread and make it in your own home instead of stealing from the baker?
What does that look like? How does it work socially, economically, and politically? I think I would just sort of put an exclamation point on something Paul said about, and Tony, you alluded to as well, that like money is a very ancient institution that has been around for millennia and that has had an extraordinary complex range of different forms and media and social arrangements behind it over the course of thousands of years.
You know what? Red May is almost over, all right.
Innumerable different.
I have held it together up until this
over
point.
That time, and
last night's stream pushed me over the edge.
It's been embedded in all kinds of different social formations and patterns, but it's only once the capitalist mode of production, I mean, I would argue, is sort of fully consolidated and fully remakes social relationships on the ground in the way that the majority of the population, no longer has access to the means of reproducing themselves economically, the classically understood means of production. When all of the collective labor of society, of global society, is now mediated by this labor process and this regime of labor control and control over the productive system that money provides, it's only then that it comes to suffuse every nook and cranny of social life, and at the same time to be totalized into this global form of power that reaches across like international lines, transnational divisions, to affect everyone in every country insofar as they're subject to the whims of the ownership class who has all the money. So it's that process of both sort of like totalization and seepage into ordinary everyday life that I think is really key for understanding the way that, or one thing that's really important.
Philip has just discovered we're in the chat.
Modernity.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to add, of course, when you get down to the details, like you say. I guess the only thing I'll add to this is just how confusing it is as a thing in our lives, right? Because on
money's
the surface
not
level, it gives us some freedom.
You give someone value and you get value
either,
in
right?
return.
If you have some money in your pocket,
it's actually very simple.
Whether you want to buy this or whether you want to buy that. And so when Milton Friedman comes along and says capitalism is all about freedom, I mean, that resonates because we have that everyday experience.
Because it's true.
But the very thing that gives us freedom, as you both said, is this external force that is dominating us in a very impersonal way. We think we can go about free to choose our own ends, but we're in this system where there's a pre-given end for the society as a whole. Money has to become more money. There has to be, in Marxist terms, capital has to be validated, has to be valorized. We have an initial amount of money, then we have to end up with more money at the end of it. And the whole society is subjugated under that imperative. So the very thing that gives us a type of freedom also subjugates us. And to keep both of those things in mind at the same time is part of the reason why it's so hard to get a handle on capital. Okay, so why don't we move from that and talk about today, get to the discussion of contemporary capitalism. And certainly one of the most striking things today is just how crazy some of these monetary variables have become, some of these numbers. They're just absolutely
I bet you these guys hate Bitcoin. I bet you they hate Bitcoin.
Just the total amount of debt in the capitalist economy. Now, there's been debt from day one in back to the Assyrians had some sort of debt. But the total amount of debt in the global capitalism today, I think, is something like $200 trillion. So that's like 200 with 9 zeros after it. That's an incommensurable, unimaginable magnitude to try to get our head around. If you look about the value of financial assets, I think between 2000 and 2021, there's been a $160 trillion increase in the value of financial assets. Again, just an unimaginable number. If you look at central bank pumping money into the economy, I think for the last COVID period, there was like $15 trillion pumped into the global economy. And again, this isn't in the history of capitalism about any of that. So, I mean, every generation thinks it's in some unique period of time, but there does seem to be something really unique about this period. And if you look at some of these monetary figures, they certainly give a sign to that. And both of your books sort of really take that on board, right? We need some narrative. We need some way to understand how did we get here so that these money numbers look so crazy, not just relative to other periods in history, but relative to other periods in capitalism. So maybe, Jamie, you could begin. That's certainly a dominant theme of your book, is just trying to understand how we got here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting
PhD students at Northwestern
additional facts to the wild monetary.
Paul needs to turn off his microphone. Can someone mute Paul?
Tony, is that if you sort of follow the trajectory of the so-called advanced economies, right after the big crash of 2008, 2009, when the regime of monetary expansion really got going, and sort of really the central banks of the world really kicked it into full gear, and with quantitative easing and all of that, if you put that arrow going way up astronomically in terms of like the sheer amount of money and credit that's being injected into these economies, next to the rates of global GDP growth, just like the crudest measure of growth that we have, right? Real GDP or otherwise. I mean, that line is just going down for the United States, for Europe, for Japan, like even for China.
What is
after
that?
2015, 2016.
Is that Philip? What the hell is going on?
You have this global trend of tremendous monetary expansion and inflation in the money supply. Not necessarily talking about prices, but of the money supply. Happening parallel to the continual degradation in the rates of growth, of national growth, for the core of the global economy. And so that's a sort of key fact for understanding, I think, why these monetary experiments are getting larger and more drastic and more just huge over time. Is because the sort of running of national economic policy has largely devolved.
I don't think it's
into
Paul though,
the
because
area
it doesn't
of
match up with what
policy.
Paul's doing.
This is changing now over the last couple of years. They're trying some new experiments with this new
very distracting Philip
switch to fiscal policy in the U.S. or into this new industrial policy. We could maybe talk about that later. But for the better part of most of the neoliberal period was all about what the central banks do or can't do to restart growth. And the one sort of channel they had and the lever they could pull was the interest rate, manipulating the interest rate through the deposits that they take or give back within the banking system and that they hold in the central bank itself of the private banking system, influencing interest rates through that method, or just outright increasing the amount of central bank money in the private banking system and in the U.S. in the Federal Reserve System, and so just juicing the level of deposits across the board for all of the financial institutions.
I'm trying to help them
in the hope that they are going to lend.
I can't even hear the presentation.
Growth, capital accumulation,
socialists always. Autumn, why do socialists suck at technology?
That
like universally, you guys suck at technology, especially audio.
Sort of 2009, 10, when they began to experiment with these kinds of policies, up till the pandemic, when things began to change. None of that was moving the needle on the investment rates and the rates of capital and production investment.
Even other people are saying it. They're like, "What the fuck is going on with the mic?"
And as a result, productive enterprise or capitalist enterprises that employ like large numbers of people were not being started, investment was not happening, and the vast majority, a lot of that extra credit and sort of money that was injected into the system sort of just went toward the inflation of financial assets, as we know. It's not a one-to-one correlation, right? But it would be hard, I think, to dispute that the astronomical rise in financial asset values that we've seen over the last couple of decades is unrelated to the basically zero.
Autumn, I don't have high production value or like fancy donors as well, but I don't have audio issues like this.
To kickstart
I have
growth
me
in a more
and a microphone and some things that the microphone is plugged into that I don't really even know how to use. And I don't do this bad,
right?
Autumn. Sam Peter's been doing this a long time. He has no excuses.
The working classes in a way that the ruling class and the political class who tries to order things on their behalf would be happy with. And I think especially the events of 2020, like the pandemic, and 2021, when the Trumpist mobs stormed the Capitol in DC. I think those events really sort of made the policy elite realize they had to try to do something maybe a little different from business as usual to get things going again.
What?
But all of I guess like put a bow on it.
You think January 6th had to do with the monetary system? Are you stupid? You're a PhD student at Northwestern.
Of credit and the money it's based on in the financial system over the last decade and a half or so is, I would argue, directly related to the continual stagnation and degradation of the rates of growth in the advanced capitalist economies over that same period of time, and in a way that it was a failed response essentially to that pattern, among other things.
Paul, in your book, you give an explanation for what's happened. The two things that Jamie talked about. We have financialization on the one hand. We have low rates of investment, low rates of growth in the economy as a whole on the other hand. And as Jamie said, these two things are very much connected. But in your book, you give a historical narrative of how they were connected and why they got more connected as today. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure, because the phenomena that Jamie is talking about are actually the pair of phenomena that go together and that do explain the situation that you began by describing, the enormous rise in credit. So if you look at it historically, you could say that for the first part of the existence of capitalism, the extension of credit, the making of loans, plays a relatively constrained role in the functioning of the capitalist system. It's always been essential because running a business is something that takes place in time. So you have to pay people every day, you have to buy raw materials, and then they make something, and then maybe a year or 2 years later you sell it and you get the money back. But in the meantime, you need to buy more raw materials and hire more people. So you borrow money. So banking and the extension of credit to business has always been an essential part of capitalism. It's what makes possible the expansion of the system. And it allows it to expand and contract cyclically, which it has been doing since the early 19th century. But there is a real change in the period since the Second World War, that there is, right after the Second World War, a 30 years of enormous prosperity in which there is a lot of investment all over the world. Governments play a very important role because the American government in particular had to finance the recreation of the world economy after World War II. But basically, the system was a self-sustaining system, operating as capitalism is supposed to operate. But by the 1960s, this tendency that Jamie was talking about, a decline of investment, was already beginning to manifest itself. And there was already a lot of talk in the mid-1960s among economists about the decline in profitability of capitalist business. And of course, that it makes sense because capitalists, as you said, Tony, invest money in order to make more money. If profits go down for some reason, there will be less investment. And in fact, that is what began to happen in the mid to late 60s. By 1973, that produced a major recession, the first major recession after the Great Depression of 1929. And at that point, one could observe a major change in the history of capitalism, which was this. Up until that moment, capitalism was characterized by a cycle of boom and bust periods. You would have growth, and then you would have a depression, and then you would return to a period of growth. And without going into detail, you could say, just looking at it empirically, there seemed to be some relationship between the bust period and the successive period of growth. But by the 1970s, actually by already the 1940s, the ruling classes of the world were no longer ready to deal with the social consequences of depression on the scale which they had already experienced in 1929, which had led to enormous social movements all over the world and ultimately to a Second World War. It's the only way of readjusting economic spheres of interest among the major capitalist nations. So they were not willing to allow a return to the depression conditions. And in order to avoid that, you had to have an enormous expansion of credit. The governments had to borrow money in order to spend money to hire people. And they also spent, or just to feed them. And banks had to be allowed to lend money to investors in the absence of sufficient rates of profit to justify normal investment behavior. And that has really been the story from, I would say, from the 70s to the present, that there has been, as Jamie said, statistically, you can see a steady decline in investment, a steady decline in growth rates that goes through the cyclical movement of the economy. And this sort of everybody sees and everybody recognizes. You know, for example, if you look at even official official economists attempt to describe what's going on, point to the problem of insufficient investment. This is widely recognized to be the major problem afflicting the world economy. And of course, the problem is that simply making money available in the form of bank credit or government borrowing does not lead to investment. So that money went somewhere else. It went into the inflation of asset values. It went into the inflation of real estate. It went into the rise in gold prices. It went into the stock market. It went into the bond market. But none of that solves the problem of actually of a declining rate of growth of the economy. And the decline, it is the economy's growth which ultimately has to pay back all those trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars which are created by governments and banks in advance. And you can see that problem is constantly being solved piecemeal, both through the bursting of all the various bubbles, like the dot-com bubble of 2000, or the current banking crises is another example, or the cutting in half of Mr. Gautam Adani's.
They're not wrong about the banking stuff. That's going to be a problem, by the way.
Adani's.
I don't think socialism is the
company
answer to
values
that, but that's going to be a
in
problem.
a 1 week period, and also in the declining standard of living of the working population, which appears in the popular press in the form of the growth of inequality. That what you have is, on the one hand, the accumulation of money in the form of debt in the hands of business people, but on the other hand, since somebody has to pay for it, you have a continuous chiseling away at the living standards of the working population. So that inflation, you could say, to put it at its crudest, is a way of transferring income
Why
from
do all of
workers
these
to
elitist
capitalists. That is its
professors
main
always
function, and
pretend
it
to
has
care
been
about
its
the
main
worker?
function since the Second World War.
You know that
And it's
Jamie
why
guy
you
doesn't give a
have
flying flip about the
you had
worker,
an
right?
enormous increase
Everyone's
in
clear on
inflation in
this.
the
None of
70s,
them really do, but
when
especially
the
that Jamie
crisis
guy.
period, crisis
You can tell just
phenomena
by looking at him, he
reappeared,
doesn't.
and why you
He has
now
never even
have the
talked to a worker in his
mysteriously
life.
unsolvable problem of inflation. Because it continues to be necessary to extract money from the wage earning population, simply in order to maintain the system in existence at all.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about
Please mute Paul.
Sorry.
Please mute Paul. Please.
When we talk about the contemporary economy,
No,
what makes it different,
mute
of course,
him.
that's immensely complicated. But one thing that strikes me is that if you look in past periods of really dynamic growth in capitalism, like the so-called golden ages,
you can tell just by looking at him.
There was a region of the global economy that
he's
had
an
a
elitist
massive
PhD student at Northwestern.
a massive lead
I
over
promise
other
you, he
regions,
is what I say he is.
in terms of productivity, technology, science.
Show me Jamie's pay stub from
innovation
Starbucks,
in
and then we can have a conversation about
you look
how
at the
I'm
Netherlands,
wrong. But until
and
then,
England, and then the United States, like in their golden dynamic periods, it would take other parts of the world like 50 years to catch up. And when they and so the key to capitalism, I think, is that it's not just making innovation. It's like how long you get to enjoy an innovation over your competitors. And in the really dynamic periods of capitalism, the units of capital, the regions of capital that had big advantages were able to enjoy those advantages for decades and decades and decades. And what seems different about our world is that there are all these national innovation systems that are pretty effective, right? The United States has a good one, but so does Germany, so does Japan, so does China, much to everybody's dismay. And what that means is no units of capital, no regions in the capitalist world system can really enjoy a competitive advantage for an extended period of time. Just because others can catch up, because others have good national innovation systems too. So how do you get profit? How do you valorize your investment when you can't enjoy a competitive advantage for an extended period of time? Well, you can do it if you have a more ruthless war against labor than other countries. You can do it if you can impose an intellectual property rights system on the global economy, because then even if others can catch up,
intellectual property is private
and you
property?
can maintain your competitive advantage. Or you could do it in the way Paul described and put your money somewhere else. So what we have so we have financialization, and so we have this weird economy where there's a handful of companies in the industrial sector, the non-financial sector, and they're all the ones that have tremendous amounts of intellectual property rights. And so it's not that other companies couldn't catch up to their technologies, it's that we have a property rights system imposed ultimately by the US military that prevents them from doing that. And so there's only going to be a handful of companies that get to enjoy that dynamism from the innovation today. And so like Paul said, all this other money that's out there to be invested, it has to go somewhere else. And so I think that's one thing that is very different about our economy, and that is, explains a lot of why it looks so weird. And if you think what would change that, well, if a world war took out the national innovation system of China or Germany, then we could have another golden age in the United States. But short of that, it's hard to see where the dynamism's going to come from. Which brings us to the question of policy. Now, Paul, you raised the issue of inflation. It seems like the number one policy objective of the powers that be in the United States today is to control, and and as Jamie's described, they also want to sort of get the economy going again by going to something more aggressive industrial policy. These two policies seem to have some tension with each other. Paul, since this is such topic in your book. Maybe you could just go into a little more detail about how you evaluate this, the present obsession with getting inflation under control, the politics of it. Anything more to say about that than what you've said already?
He's upset they want to get inflation under control.
That's a lot to say about it, but to be brief, there are two, I see two aspects that are worth emphasizing. One is that the people who run the world don't actually understand how it works. They really don't. I mean, it may be hard to believe that, but they actually have no idea how their system works. If you read economic policy or economic theory, it's nonsense. They literally don't understand how, they don't really understand what money is and how it works or how it fits into society. And so they have because in academic economic theory, money is just a technology for facilitating the exchange of goods between owners. They actually believe that. So then they think, if there's money problems, then that somehow can be solved without affecting anything fundamental in the operation of the social system as a whole. These are money problems, and so you have specialists in money, the bankers, the central bankers, and they're supposed to solve this problem. And of course, they actually can't do it because the problems aren't money problems. The problems are problems of low profitability and low investment as a result. So part of the story is that they actually believe that they can somehow control the system by manipulating the money supply, but it always turns out that they don't really succeed in doing it as they wish. The other part of it, though, is that even though they don't really understand their system, they have to operate with the system as it actually exists. And the way in which the system actually exists is that what profit there is comes from the exploitation of labor. And that means that if you are in a period of very low productivity growth, in which it's very difficult to increase the productivity of labor, the only way you can increase profitability is to decrease wages. So that is being accomplished on a global scale, partly through these monetary changes. So you have, that explains the completely bizarre, situation in which the economists and the money policy people say, we need to fight inflation by creating more unemployment because there's a real danger of a wage price spiral. But in fact, there is no such danger. Wages are have risen much more slowly than prices. Wages have been stagnant or declining for 50 years. Wages are not the origin of inflation. Everybody can see that. Anybody who looks at the data can see it. In fact, it's now even publicly recognized more and more that actually companies are just raising their prices. That is why prices are going up, not because workers have managed to raise their wages. But nevertheless, that's the only thing they can do, is to try to lower wages even more. So on the one hand, the companies try to solve their problem by raising their prices. On the other hand, the government banking authorities try to lower wages by increasing unemployment, even though that conflicts, as you pointed out, with the other story, which is the attempt to compete internationally with other industrial centers through this so-called new economic policy, which maybe Jamie, I know, has been thinking about this a lot. So maybe you want to address that directly.
Yeah, I'm happy to. But Tony, did you have anything to add to?
No, I'd like to hear what you say too.
Yeah, sure. So I think while, of course, I agree with Paul's analysis of the
everyone go check out the Everyday Therapist channel. He does really good work.
What they actually believe money is, and how that belief is turns into a real force through the way the decisions that they make to govern the economic system under those concepts. It's based on that systematic misunderstanding of what the role of money is, and of course, much less like the necessity of reproducing class to reproduce the economy. But nevertheless, they do get more desperate over time. as they see, and more willing to sort of, in a pragmatic spirit, experiment and carry out make new kinds of practical choices that are quite different from the ones that they've made before, in an effort to just basically try to get the situation under control, because nothing else is working. And I would argue that's what we're seeing now, with the turn, not just in the US, by the way, pretty much globally in all the major powers, to yes, like this new paradigm of industrial policy, which not that long ago, I mean 5 or 6 years ago, would have been dismissed as pure nonsense by the establishment, just like the relic of an older and more benighted time before globalization, and before this more enlightened understanding of the universal benefits of open and liberal trade between all, lifts up all parties. And that turned out to be completely false. So what we have now is this sort of, what seems to me at least to be an epochal moment, where the US has essentially decided that they're willing to blow up the global political order that they constructed in the aftermath of World War II, and within the environment of the emerging Cold War, and all the relationships and alliances that were formed in that period within the umbrella of the Bretton Woods system. And we can talk more about those kinds of concepts if viewers would like us to. But the idea was that under this US-centered international system of free trade, first in the Western non-Soviet bloc, and then in the entire world, right? Like open trade with open trade regimes and liberal trade policies and open capital flows, liberal labor regimes too, of course. We're going to allow the US-sponsored system of international political and economic governance to sort of just continue along, and eventually allow developing economies to grow and become wealthier. And this was the idea, right, during the so-called neoliberal period. That event, over the last 2 or 3 years, basically the policy elite has decided that story is false, and they were wrong to have believed it. They do come to conclusions of this kind, where they're like, well, that was plainly wrong. But because they have a completely inadequate sort of conceptualization of the way the main relationships of the system is, how they work, of the system that they supervise, they jump to the total opposite end of the spectrum, which in this case is just sort of raw economic nationalism, where now the idea is, and the US is leading the charge in this, is that you simply destroy your competitors economically by leveraging, in the US's case, its immense monetary seigniorage powers and its ability, its privileges as the custodian of the world's global reserve currency, the dollar, and it's just overall sort of political power to more directly subsidize mostly manufacturing industries and a lot in the sort of post-carbon clean energy space, in an attempt to jumpstart employment and investment and profitability and productivity, labor productivity, largely at the expense of its so-called allies in Europe and Japan and South Korea, who were very upset, when the so-called Inflation Reduction Act was passed last year, and essentially just signaled to the world that the U.S. was giving up on liberal internationalism for all intents and purposes, and it was ready to just sort of pull the playbook of the 1950s back out again, when there was sort of more of a however atrophied sense of the state and the government's responsibility to cultivate strong and consistent growth, and there was more of a sort of willingness to for the state sector, for public investment to play a role in that. They're trying to sort of retrieve a little bit of that legacy and reactivate it for the present, but under very different conditions, where the buildup and the concentration of industry at the global level, and the sheer amount of investment that it takes to compete industrially at the sort of the frontier of global productivity and manufacturing, right, requires just astronomical amounts.
This guy is not saying anything.
Investment and huge amounts of money.
Like nothing. Word
and
salad.
You can, it's not open to obviously to any certainly emerging economy or otherwise to just jump into this fray and industrialize in the old kind of development sense. So because it has not been profitable to manufacture in the United States, much less like emerging economies, they are now trying to, as it were, like artificially make it profitable through the direct intervention of the state and the government by giving these huge subsidies to people to buy electric cars, huge subsidies to people who companies that want to come in and manufacture batteries, for instance, and in that way try to jumpstart the sort of investment, employment, growth paradigm in that way. But as I mentioned, it's very much we're in, because what we're dealing with is not a bunch of independent nation states necessarily with their own coherent forms of growth competing separately and autonomously with each other, but rather a one transnational system that is slowly becoming more and more anemic in its ability to produce the level of profitability growth that's going to allow it to expand. What we have now is like an increasingly zero-sum situation, right, where high-end productivity growth and industrial investment.
Is he saying anything? Am I missing something here?
Export-led growth in some countries.
Let me know in the chat.
Is really going to come only at the expense
that's all I'm hearing.
of other countries. And so that's where we're in. That's where we're at now. That's what the new industrial policy means. And so the U.S. is finding it very difficult to sort of implement this kind of policy and at the same time maintain its quite shaky, anti-China alliance that it has constructed internationally and done its best to sort of coerce, kicking and screaming like countries like Germany and South Korea into, mostly against their own interests. And that political objective and the economic industrial policy objective are kind of in conflict with each other, right? Because those countries are very unhappy with the direction the United States is going. And, they put on a happy face at the G7 conference, that as you probably saw recently, and a big show of unity and everything, but the contradictions and the tensions between the great powers are in no way gone. They're still very much there. So we'll have to see how that turns out. I'm pretty skeptical that they'll be able to sort of hold everything together, but that's how it seems to me.
Yeah, and these things are of course connected. There is a connection, of course, between the inflation rate idea and raising the rate of interest in order to keep inflation down, and economic nationalism, right? Because raising the rate of interest in the global economy is just going to have horrific effects on lots of nations, right? We can already see African countries that are just going to be utterly devastated by trying to roll over their loans at higher rates of interest. So I mean, interest rate policy can also be a weapon in international geopolitical struggles like you're talking about. I mean, I just wonder what's going to happen next in terms of all of this, because in a way, and you both talk about this in your book, in a way, in the typical way capitalism worked, I think Paul mentions this, right? If you look at capitalism in the 19th century going into the 20th century, between something like a third of the time to a half of the time, it was in depression. So we had this major global slowdown in the 70s. We did not have a depression. And we did not have a depression, partly because of the incredible amount of money that was injected into the economy, the incredible amount of credit that was injected into the economy. It didn't give us that much growth, didn't give us much advance in productivity, certainly didn't do much for the average worker, but it stopped a depression. So in a way, we've been deferring a depression that would have happened in ordinary capitalism for decades and decades and decades. And so we haven't talked about zombie capitals, which is a concept that both of you talk about in your book. Now, there's a technical definition where a zombie capitalist firm can't meet its interest payments without borrowing more.
I see.
Without more borrowing to meet the interest. And somewhere between 1/3 to 1/5 of units of capital, the biggest units of capital, are zombie capitals in that sense. But in a wider sense, if you say a capital that would have died if it hadn't been for this extraordinary infusion of debt and credit, then really all capitals could be zombie capitals. And will raising the rate of interest in order to deal with inflation just start destroying zombie capitals on some unimaginable scale. So that this economic nationalism that we talk about, it's just going to be even more desperate, right? A more desperate chance to keep your capitals alive any way you can, because what's kept the zombie capitals going for a long time is no longer going to work in the very near future. Well, anyway, just a comment. I don't know if that resonates or makes any sense.
Well, for one thing, it's not just the future. The bankruptcy rate is rising very rapidly now in the United States and also in Europe. Yeah. And it's the zombie capitals, because what made zombie capital possible was extremely low interest rates, which in some places were actually negative interest rates. You made money by loaning, by borrowing money. So when you raise the interest rates, you inhibit the further extension of credit, and many of those zombies are now beginning to go out of business. So that is, that's something that you can say, you can already see what the effects are. But, I would say, to answer your general question, which I think is it's the really interesting one. In a way, they're stuck. They're really, there is that famous old left-wing phrase, the contradictions of capitalism. But there really are contradictions of capitalism. They really are stuck. I think these are really insoluble problems. For example, the kind of issue of nationalism and national industrial policy in the face of a global economy, a transnational economy that Jamie is talking about. It was a very interesting interview in the Financial Times the other day with the guy who runs NVIDIA, the chip company that just reached $1 trillion stock market valuation because they make the chips that are used in AI. So right now, everybody believes, AI is going to save capitalism. This also isn't going to work. But nonetheless, that's where everybody's rushing to make at least short-term money by investing. So, and he said, you can't decouple from China. China is 30% of our market. They said, you can build a chip factory in the United States if you don't want to buy Chinese chips, but you can't build another. He said, there's only one China. So it's just nonsense. You cannot say, oh no, you're not allowed to trade with China because then we'll go bankrupt. So that's really the problem. That's the situation they're in. That there is this one Dutch company that makes the equipment which you need now for the most advanced kind of computer chips. And the Americans are saying, no, you can't trade with China. But China is probably their biggest future market. So they will have to trade with China, or else they will have to go to war with America. So I think they're really now in this, you can see the Americans themselves are going back and forth. No, we're not decoupling, we're de-risking. We're not really breaking up the whole world economy. We're just trying to move away a little bit. And you can see they just don't know what to do because they have to.
So what should they do?
Compete, and they actually, as
what
you
would
were
you
saying,
prefer
now,
they do? Do you have any plan
they
at
have
all?
to destroy the industrial capacity in other countries. The emerging countries don't matter. I think Africa and all those people, they will just pump out the oil and steal the minerals, and a few government leaders will have big Swiss bank accounts, and everybody else will just have to die.
So what is your plan,
they're
Paul?
going to die from heat stroke or starvation or whatever it is.
Everything sucks,
but the real
and we're all going to
between
hell.
the
What is your
developed
plan to
countries,
fix
which
it?
now include China, and they are afraid. On the one hand, they do not want to have nuclear warfare, which will also not lead to a flourishing global economy. I think they probably understand that. But on the other hand, they can't all survive. Somebody, so we will have to have a deep depression. To answer the question you asked before, what would allow a return to capitalist prosperity? You would have to really go through a deep depression and probably global war in order for those few corporations
the only way for capitalism to survive is for us to go through a
it's even hard to
depression and
imagine what
global
that could
war.
possibly mean at this point, because now they have destroyed the earth to such an extent. And
Paul is basically like,
you know,
and
they
they're
have
going
really
to scorch the
developed
sun.
capitalist
Paul is like,
economy to the
we
point
need to
where
create a
I find it
matrix-like
very difficult
environment
to imagine
under the
that it
Earth's
has a
core.
future. This is why I like very
That
much
is the only
the
way
title
that
of Jamie's
capitalism will
book,
survive.
Endgame. I really think this is, you know, if the economy doesn't sink, it definitely the climate change is going to destroy the system.
I told you, he's like, we need to scorch the
they're
sun.
not
We
going
need
to
to
be
scorch
able
the
to
sky to
survive
protect us
the
from the
complete
sun.
destruction of the world's food supply and mass heat death.
I told you, climate change
they are not
coming.
equipped to deal with this kind of problem. As you can see, they are unable even to slow down the rate of carbon dioxide emissions, which is increasing all the time. With all the yakking about the green economy and electric cars,
I'm like
now
half
they can
tempted to go
force
into their
people to
chat and ask,
try to get people
Paul,
to buy
do
a
you
new kind
believe
of
that
car. But in fact, emissions are
scorch
going
the
up all the
sky
time.
to block out the sun
It's
and
they
all
can't
move into
even
the Earth's
do
surface
that because
after the global war and the AI
that
takes
would
over?
destroy
Will
the
capitalism
world's
still
largest
survive?
corporations, which are, if you
I'm not going to
look
do it.
at
I don't want to
the
get
world's
blocked.
largest corporations
That's
in
kind of what
terms
I
of
want to ask.
revenue, automobile companies, banks, and oil companies. So there's not going to be a green revolution. They just can't do it.
There's absolutely
And so
not going
I
to be a
think
green
we're
revolution.
now, it is a historical turning point. I know Marxists always like to say this. Oh yes, now capitalism is on us. The end is near. I don't know how near it is, but you can see I think you can see the end. And I think the people who saw the end
Paul
50 years ago,
seeing the end of capitalism.
They saw through a glass darkly, but they were right.
Paul is taking
this is
some
not a
good
system
drugs.
which is going to go on for another 200 years. It's not possible.
Okay, well, maybe we should end with that. I just want to make one brief comment before we go to questions, which is that a lot of people on the progressive left, it seems to me they take the wrong message from what's gone on with money in the last decades.
I'm gonna be like,
so they
has
look
Jamie
at
ever
all this
had
money
a
that
blue-collar
the central
job?
bank has
Is going to be
created
my
out of nothing,
question.
and ordinary banks have created out of nothing.
Has
and they
Jamie
say, well,
ever
why
mingled
can't we
with the
just create
proletariat?
money and use it to have a green revolution? Just create money out of thin air and use it to create full employment. Use it to create good jobs at good pay and all that. And that gets to and you can see why that would be intuitive, because capital does get to create money and does get to use it for what it wants. But I think both of your books really really go to a very deep theory of what the state is and what the money creation process is that the state allows and doesn't allow. And I think they just really are books that people who are progressive but sort of buy into that we can reform this if we just get enough political control over it, and we can use the central bank to deal with environmental problems and create full employment at good jobs and all that. It would be nice if any of that were true, but it just isn't true. And the capitalism we're dealing with is much more brutal, and what it has in store for us, as Paul just sketched there, is really a horrific future, environmentally and economically, in the very near future, if we don't learn what the system is. And I think both of the books that the two of you have just written are really great places to get an understanding of that. So maybe we should open it up now. We have some time left to deal with questions. I don't know quite how that system works, but
I would like to know what they think about Bitcoin.
Maybe we should stop and let the people who know take over.
And next, I'm going to ask: has Jamie ever had a blue-collar job,
really illuminating
or
talks.
Mingled with the proletariat in any way?
I have a question of my own, and while I ask it to you, maybe I can gather ones from the comments to see whether they're good. I mean, I think Robert Brenner is talking now about how essentially certain firms that have strategic political power are capable of keeping themselves going, not by any kind of profitable activity, but simply getting one subsidy after another. How long do you think something like that can go on? Or is that something that the only way that breaks is when there is a kind of political revolution against it, rather than the business as usual that keeps going on? I mean, the number of subsidies that have been handed out in the last I don't know, since the financial crisis, beggar the imagination.
That's a good question,
with
Krista.
no kind of political rebound. So I wonder what your take is on that.
You can see, for example, at the present time, there's an enormous subsidization of the armaments industry. So everybody in Europe and America is very excited about the war in Ukraine. They're making gigantic amounts of money
I'm
from
sure
it.
you
But
guys
of course,
are thrilled about
none
the
of
war
this
in
helps with the development of capitalist profitability. This is all money which is taken out of the system, handed to Lockheed or Grumman or to some bomb maker in Belgium, and then it just gets dumped in Ukraine or Russia and destroyed. So they can continue to you could see in the current debt negotiations in the United States, you say, oh no, we have to support the military. So that's what you're talking about. That's a subsidization of selected corporations. But of course, everybody else has to pay for it. So that means they're not going to be building more highways. They're not going to build bridges. They're not going to. They probably won't even be able to subsidize chip factories. They're not going to have a green revolution. So it's like the wealthy countries will eventually become. They are now becoming more and more like the poor countries. If you look at a country like Egypt, which is a very underdeveloped, small economy, you have this enormous amount of poverty. That's because all of the money has to go to 10 people who all want to have apartments in London and a house in the Hamptons and to be able to go to Gstaad to go skiing if they ever have any snow again and so forth. So it's just like that here, that the people who have been invested in Grumman or will collect a lot of money. But in the meantime, all the people who invested in real estate trusts and who are looking to see their leases in commercial real estate renewed in the next 10 years in American cities, they're not going to get any money. Those real estate trusts are all going to go broke. All those pension funds that have all their money invested in commercial real estate, that money is just going to disappear. So Grumman will make money, but the economy will continue to collapse. And the parts that aren't subsidized will collapse faster because of the subsidization. So the more money they get pumped into making shells for Ukraine, the less money there is to renew real estate leases in San Francisco and New York. So what you have is a distribution of a declining pool of money among a declining pool of people on a global scale. So how long it will take before people can't stand it anymore, it's very hard to know. But you can already, people, you can see, like I live in San Francisco at the moment, the ruling class of San Francisco is really disturbed that there's no money. And this is a very rich city. This is the center.
I wonder if Paul has an explanation for why San Francisco is creating
AI around the
descending into a dystopian
artificial intelligence is booming. Money is flowing in, but the banks are collapsing. The real estate is collapsing. So there's a small handful of companies that are collecting. NVIDIA is collecting $1 trillion, but everybody else who bought, who spent $1 trillion buying buildings has now lost that $1 trillion. So that's the problem.
Let me push back on that, or reframe it. Are you saying, for example, that there's no place to get a return, and which you hear a lot, for example, is one of the problems
today in their chat.
One of the reasons that all synthetic derivatives and things were created was literally with all the money that came into the world that the banks were printing, and both private and government, and the go-go Clinton years, there weren't a lot of places to put it to get a big return, particularly when they started to take the interest rate down. So it's more.
I'm sure you're right.
Isn't it more a case that, well, there's a lot of money around, but there's nowhere for it to go because everything that was profitable.
Oh, I promise you, there are places for money to go.
And unless you have strategic power within the political system, to sort of extort subsidies towards what you're doing, it's very hard to go play even a straight Keynesian investment game and make the kind of money you were making before.
Yes, except that it's not even money; it's credit.
Well,
it's not even real money. It's just some paper money that has been invented. So that's the problem. And credit works great if you could pay it back in the future. But that's at the moment you could. So from what I'm sorry I interrupted you, but you can even see in China, which is sort of the most dynamic part of the world economy. But the engine of the Chinese prosperity is real estate speculation. It's not even production. It's real estate speculation, which is now all collapsing.
I find the idea that you say that the people who are running the system don't understand how it works, both plausible and horrifying.
I agree with that, actually.
You know,
I 100% agree that the people running the system don't know how it works. I disagree with the notion that they can listen to these people, but we can agree that the people running the system have no idea how it works.
The interdependence of the world that is trying to go back to the Cold War and make aggressive gestures and get the U.S. ready to fight.
You always have to look for common ground when you can find it.
3 adversaries or 2.5 or whatever the fuck the number is. You know, that they literally
the profanity.
There are people who keep pushing this for one reason. Maybe there are a few others who are believers in military Keynesianism who think it's going to be good for the economy and so forth. But the notion of why the economy is having trouble and whether it can go it alone into nationalism, as Jamie is going to destroy when his book comes out. I mean, it's a strange notion of how unconnected one part of the government is to the other. It seems, you know.
And the idea of going it alone is not, I mean, that's not really what they have in mind, right? They want to maintain a hierarchy in the world system. And they want to maintain the United States position at the top of the hierarchy. And that means not letting places below be places that get to appropriate surplus for themselves, right? They want the surplus to flow towards the United States, and that means not letting China move to the edge of the scientific, technological, innovative envelope. Right? China was doing low-skilled work on a massive scale for U.S. capital, but as it moved up the value chain, started competing against the areas where we have the competitive advantage. That's when it all turned. That's when they made that turn. So I don't think anybody really thinks the United States is ever going to be completely autonomous in the world market. I mean, that's not really the project, right? The project is to maintain. And Jamie goes into this in a lot of detail. And it's an imperialist project, right? There's a global pool of value that's created out there in the world, and the point is to have U.S. capital get the biggest share of that possible. And intellectual property rights are one way to do that. Subsidizing our
Philip believes in intellectual property rights,
but that's the project.
Let me just play devil's advocate on this to go back because I'd love to hear your answers to this. There's an interesting book called Planetary Mind by Martin Arboleda from Verso, which I think is really wonderful. And what he says, so much of economic policy has been formulated in national terms, as if there's a very strong constituency in the U.S. that wants to build up the quality of the nation. No, but I'm not going to ask if
Jamie's trans. I already asked if Jamie's ever mingled with the proletariat.
A bunch of people with money who are happy to belong to the nation where they don't pay taxes.
I don't think Jamie's trans. I just think he has a tiny cock.
When it comes time for taxes.
It's not quite the same thing.
They're always in search of relative surplus value around the world rather than the wealth of their particular nation. How does that contradiction play out together from the people who really people who push the idea of American power from just a habit from 50 years of Cold War or something, to other people who are saying, I'll move to Hong Kong if they, or New Zealand and invest from there. If I'm going to take all the money there, that's is that a conflict that we're going to see play out among fractions of capital in the future?
I couldn't really hear you, Philip. What's the conflict that you're describing?
The conflict between people who are habituated to a Cold War notion of economics being for making the nation powerful, as opposed to people who have been really
why don't they want the nation
schooled
to be
in
powerful?
globalization and see it the search for relative surplus value as what drives their particular activities in every facet of life.
Oh, because they want to globalize. Got it.
Taking citizenship in Hong Kong at
like,
some time.
Everyone belongs to everyone else. You will own nothing, and you will be happy.
Basically, when it comes to that, it's where's the money gonna turn over best? And I really don't care how strong the nation gets, unless I need it for making money. That's what I'm saying. I was wondering, is there a contradiction there that could play
Why
out?
is globalization preferable?
Yeah, I think within just with the U.S. state, I think, and with the broader ruling class, there has been a lot of jockeying in recent years. I would argue, and really over the last 10 years or so, where
he doesn't sound like
the internationalists, the rootless cosmopolitans, like a lot of the richest people and investors based in the U.S. have kind of lost that international mindset that you're describing, Philip, or at least they've lost out to the wings of the capitalist class and of the ruling class, who are more interested in enlisting the support of the nation state, the full power of the U.S. government on their side to prosecute, right, the global war, the economic war on their behalf. So, Paul mentioned the NVIDIA tech CEO talking about the need to continue to access China's market. But there's also a wing of tech capital that is very, very militaristic about the confrontation with China, because China is now about to outcompete the U.S. on things like AI and computational technology, and not to mention the green manufacturing, like sort of post-carbon technology stuff, but just on the highest end of the value chain stuff, right? Like China is competing with the U.S. now, and Silicon Valley is still very much like a goose that lays the golden eggs for the U.S. economy, and is a huge part of the global intellectual property regime, that allows it to absorb so much of the world's wealth. Silicon Valley is a major pillar of that regime, and so not all of them, but a lot of the sort of tech Northern California, or it's California elite, have come around to wanting to take this much more aggressive and containment centered stance towards China, and so they're enlisted in the new Cold War. And then there are I think manufacturing companies, older companies like Caterpillar, that build construction equipment, that are very concerned about losing access to China's market. A lot of these older industrial companies are not happy about being pushed, shoved out of China's market by local competitors, and they want the U.S. state to help them basically resubordinate China back into a lower position, where they'll have more open access to China's market to sell our imports or our exports and so on, so their profits can be sustained. So I think there's just been a lot of flux within the ruling class on the old school, classic neoliberal kind of perspective on, trade is good for everyone. We need to be able to trade across borders transnationally, and that's, they don't want capital controls or any of that shit getting in their way. Versus the block of that class that is increasingly interested in exactly those kinds of controls and exactly those kinds of policies, and prosecuting the kinds of trade wars that we've seen that will be on their behalf, right, by the state over the last 7 or 8 years. Does that make sense? You're muted.
Philip, you're
Can't hear you,
muted,
Phil.
Philip. You're muted, Philip.
Look reader.
Yeah. And also realizing how much they depend on the favorable global legal design for things like intellectual property, or being able to sue other countries when they do environmental gestures for interfering with profit and so forth. I'm going to take a couple of questions from here. Some of them I'm sure you've heard before in many of your appearances, but I'll read them anyway. What do you think of Bitcoin?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Say it. Come on. Come on. Come on.
People have, well, the first thing I think, Bitcoin is not money. Bitcoin is an artificially generated asset class, basically, which has provided scope for a large number of Ponzi schemes and fraudulent enterprises, and which is probably sort of on the way out, because, but you know, there's always, as long as there are ways imaginative ways to defraud people, there are people who are happy to be defrauded because they hope that they can make money in some magical way, and then there are always people who are glad to take their money. So, but basically, it was one of those, it flourished because of the low interest regime, in which there was huge amounts of money to be invested in all kinds of crap. And so people like gold. People are buying gold like crazy now, or they were buying art, or buying real estate all over the world. So somebody, the people who invented it actually had a kind of cockamamie idea of an alternative to the money system, which would not be under the control of central banks. And there was a kind of libertarian, a nutty libertarian idea. But the only reason it flourished is it provided material for a huge amount of speculation and Ponzi scheming, as far as I can tell. But right. It's a minor phenomenon for people who have extra cash and don't mind losing it.
So another version of GameStop and with musical chairs. Okay.
Yeah.
Now here's another one.
It's an interesting ideological phenomenon, because it is connected to all those people who, sort of a tech ideology of the individual entrepreneur who can somehow be independent of governmental institutions. It's a weird,
per usual.
It's a weird ideological.
I'm glad we got a question in, though. I feel like our relationship is blossoming,
deep
Philip.
Economic importance.
Now ask the question about Jamie. I want to know if Jamie's ever had a blue-collar job.
I'm going to read a question that would probably take about 4 hours to answer, but I would love to read it.
I'm going to get another one.
Can you describe what system you would prefer instead of capitalism that will save us all?
Yes, thank you, Philip.
One sentence. Or you can call it anarchism or socialism if you want, but that's the most meaningless of all words.
All right, obviously to develop that, explain what it is, would take a very long time, but thank you for your...
I just got to say, sorry to interrupt, Phil, but I got to log off.
Okay.
Jamie is
great
avoiding the question about whether or not he's had a blue-collar job. Jamie doesn't want to answer the question on if he's had a blue-collar job.
Thanks a lot, Jamie. It was, it's really great. Always.
Bye, Jamie. We'll be following up with you soon.
Yeah, we'll keep you posted. All right. Take care, Paul. Tony.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Wrap it down. I hate to... What do you think? There are some questions that might take a fair...
You can explain more of the mystery system that you guys have in mind that will save us all.
Trade one Bitcoin for a lot of money if it has no value. Well, I think we've gone into that. Marx did suggest a transition period of non-transferable labor vouchers, but that's a far cry from modern monetary theory.
Jamie ran out, so he wasn't asked the
money,
question.
much less Bitcoin. Well, I think we'd all agree with that anyway. Is some sort of global centralization inevitable? One island of the capitalist core in Hong Kong and a worldwide periphery.
The global centralization is already happening. There's a very small number of corporations that dominate the world economy, and they are transnational corporations. So this is not a speculation about the future. It is, we already live in a highly concentrated, centralized, transnational system in which a very small transnational class, which runs, I don't know, there may be 100 corporations really are the most are basically running the world economy. So that already has happened. Right. Okay.
And in a way, it goes back to.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, in a way, it goes back to the very. Oh, I'm sorry. In the beginning discussion of what money is. I mean, the one thing that money does is it makes everything it touches commensurable. And so in principle, it doesn't recognize any borders, right? You might have your money, I might have my money, but money is going to be inherently commensurable. So we'll get an exchange rate that will connect the two money systems. I mean, this is a point Marx made. The unit of capitalism has been the world market from day one because it's bound together by money, and money makes commensurate across borders. It's like the perverse form of universal solidarity.
So what do you want instead?
Like we should have solidarity across borders because solidarity.
So what do you want instead? Can you guys describe what you want? Do you even know what you want? Do you have any sense of what you want? Can you explain what you want to the average fucking person?
I'm agreeing with Paul. The centralization of different national economies into a world market is an old story.
Someone says Marx's entire analytic system relies on commodity money and therefore cannot be a master signifier.
They have no idea what they want.
Contemporary fiat monetary and digital financial. You want
to really answer that would take a long time, but the short answer is that's just wrong. Marx assumes that money is a commodity in the 3 volumes of Capital, and particularly in the first volume. But in the first volume, there is no credit system. There are no banks. He's dealing with a highly abstracted, imaginary version of capitalism, and in which it simplifies his argument greatly to treat money as a commodity. But Marx knew perfectly well that capitalist money is not a commodity. He says so over and over. He says that the credit is the form of money that capitalism invented for itself. And even you could say that Marx still thought, because it was true at his time, that there was still a role for the commodity, for the money commodity in international trade. So he had the idea that gold could still function as world money, even though on his period of time, it already didn't function. There was no commodity money nationally. The gold standard was constantly being suspended, and you could even see that how artificial the gold standard was, that it was the values of gold and the relation between gold and the different currencies was already manipulated by governments and central banks. But that's a mistake, and it's because people don't understand that capital is not a general theory of capitalist society or even of the capitalist economy. It's a book about capital. It's not even a book about wage labor or a book about landed property. And it's certainly not a book about money. So he was going to get to the credit system and to banking in the last of his 7 volumes that he intended to write, of which he only wrote the first part of the first volume. So this is a mistake. It's very easy to fall into it because Marx does assume in volume 1 of Capital that money is a commodity, but he says quite explicitly, of course, as soon as money comes into existence, its commodity nature and its money nature begin to separate, because the minute you handle a gold coin, it begins to wear away, and the value of the coin is now the value that's printed on it, not the actual value of the gold. So Marx would see that even when you had commodity money, it wasn't really commodity money, but was already had an artificial paper-like aspect. So this is just a mistake that almost everybody says that about Marx, but it's not true.
So could I just add a little bit to that? Oh.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I understand it, Marx's theory of money is just the statement that generalized commodity production requires a generalized equivalent, right?
Exactly.
the thing about capitalism is that production is undertaken privately. And so unlike other social systems where from the beginning, if you produce something, you know it will be used in society. It has a social purpose.
Do you
in money,
think
in
that
capitalism, production is
abolishing
undertaken
private
privately, and then you have to
property
prove that
will
that production
save us
has a
all?
social function. And you prove it through sale for money. And if all commodities are proved their social necessity through sale, then there has to be some general equivalent that is the socially recognized way of validating that the private production was socially necessary. So money is that thing that serves as the general equivalent, and it can be anything, right? It can be absolutely anything, as long as there is an understanding that this is the general proof that the product is socially needed. So it's not necessarily tied to a commodity, right? It's completely open-ended what it could be, as long as it's
so
something.
To go back to one of Tony's articles from years ago, Marx inaugurated a scientific research program as opposed to providing us with some golden tablets from heaven. That research program is still going on, completing those 4 volumes that Marx didn't.
It's true. I don't expect to get any more questions in. I got 2, and that's 2 more than I usually get.
Published by historical
on the economics talk of all things that I know nothing about.
It's an unfinished notion, some of these things.
And they couldn't even answer them.
So there's no dogma here that we're doing this. We're trying to refine, I guess that one story about somebody saying to Marx, you probably know these, like, aren't you finished with Capital now, 1857? Wait, there's a depression coming. I got to finish this and see what happens. So we're all in that position. I think it's a good point to stop. I want to thank you.
Oh, now they're stopping. They don't want to take any more of my questions.
To have you on Red May, and
we'll see you tomorrow. We'll see you on Tuesday, Philip.
I do encourage people to read field notes in the Brooklyn Rail. It's online. It's really the best thing going for bringing kind of deep thought into the present conjuncture. And Tony Smith, great finally to meet you and have you, Red May. Hope we will have you back.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. It was fun. Good.
Let me just say, tomorrow is a day off. But
thank God.
Tuesday is Late Fascism at 11 a.m. with Alberto Toscano, Robin Marasco, and Nikhil Pal Singh. And Wednesday, we have The Legal Crisis in Chile. Also,
we're not watching that Chile one.
See you then. Thanks very much.
All right, guys, that is all we have for Red May today. I mean, it was a little bit dry, but we did get some good zingers in, so I have to feel happy about that. And you know what? I got 1 question in a Red May presentation just the other day, and today I got 2 questions. And I liked getting their reaction to the Bitcoin question, and I liked getting their dismissal of it, because it did seem to kind of completely contradict other things they said within the presentation, but, that's the way it goes. All right, guys. Now, more importantly than that, we are but half an hour away from the most important event of the week. We are half an hour away from movie night in the supporter Discord. At 8 p.m. tonight, we are starting Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Of course, are honoring the life and memory of Tina Turner. I haven't seen this movie in years. I'm really looking forward to it. And I hope you guys will join me in the supporter Discord. How do you join me in the supporter Discord, you ask? Well, there are basically 4 ways that you can get into my supporter Discord. Number 1, you can become a member on this here YouTube channel. And if you go to the community tab, if you are already a member, you will see a post with a link to the supporter Discord. Number 2, you can become a member in my locals community, kb.locals.com, and you will see a post directing you to the Discord, and you can join us for movie night. Number 3, you can head over to Patreon, become a paying member on my Patreon. You can get the link there. But the one I would prefer you take, if you are choosing any of these options, is to become a paying supporter on my Substack. $5 a month, $50 a year. And if you want to join us for movie night and join the supporter Discord, just head into this Unwoke Roundup email, click right into it. The Unwoke Roundup is an email that I send out on Sundays where I tell you about all the different news and stories I covered for the week. Lots of original journalism this week. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of it, you're going to hit this section that has the links for your supporter perks. In that supporter perks section, you are going to find not only the link to the supporter Discord, so you can join us for movie night in half an hour, you are also going to find the Zoom links for the private Zoom calls that you can attend with us on Mondays at 7 p.m., Wednesdays at noon. These are private, these are unrecorded. This is pretty much the best part of my community. I really do hope people who are supporting me take advantage of the Zoom calls every once in a while, because they're really fun and you're going to meet a great group of people. And we are going to be gathering in about 30 minutes to enjoy this classic movie together. If you are new to the supporter Discord, get in now so I can get you verified so that you'll be all ready to go by the time that movie night starts. And I will be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Tomorrow for the 5 p.m. stream, we're going to talk about this story over here. Tufts wants to study non-binary 3-year-olds. We're going to talk about this story over here, the Groomer Middle School, exclusively for trans kids. And we're going to talk about this story right here. Target is funding training your kids to be activists in school. All 3 of these articles are original reporting by me that you will not get anywhere else. You will only get it on my Substack, Carlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. So while the conservative Twitterati are reeing over on Twitter about what a monster I am and how horrible I am, and not doing any original journalism of their own, I see you, Christina Buttons, I really do. You can check out the original journalism that you will only find on my Substack, the most unique unwoke content on the internet. And that's just the way it goes. All right, guys, that does it for the stream today. Thank you for hanging out with me and spending some time here. And I will see some of you in half an hour in the supporter Discord for movie night. Take care, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.